ke chipo sera che mates koseta ne ui ontnani tutusen.
Let's continue with our human influence in the environment. And yeah, we did see oil spills and the detrimental effect. We see that sewage ruins our environment. And when we start to look for what is the reason is, number one, overpopulation. The reason number two, do we care enough to find solutions? And if you are part of a municipality or the government, you really have to have a lot of knowledge to manage all the waste. And nonetheless, we are going to look at undesirable effects of inorganic waste today. And yeah, of course, what is inorganic waste? Toxic chemicals, and we look at toxic chemicals like lead, mercury, and arsenic. And this, unfortunately, ends up in our soil. And the moment when it is in the soil, it can be in the water. It can lead to boreholes, to water bodies. And the effect of this is, it will cause bioaccumulation. It will increase in concentration in an organism. And when that organism is being eaten and we have moving down a food chain, eventually we have biomagnification in the food chain. And it leads to various health problems, which we will discuss now as we continue to all the different waste that we can find. If we look at toxic soup of hazardous waste, heavy metals, solvents, organic chemicals, municipal waste, inorganic waste, pesticides, paints and oil waste that we just rinse under our taps, sludges. About 300 to 700 million tons per year. Where must it be changed and getting disposed of? 90% is wastewater, which is diluted, but it contains enough material. Grade 12, lots of waste produced. Now, radiation and toxic waste. What can we do with the radiation and toxic waste? Yes, we can bury it in soil. We can do that. We can make a deep grave and we can put it in there. Or what about our lovely, huge, unused Namib Desert? There are many countries that offered us lots of money because we have this vast areas of only sand and sand and sand. It's not important. Nothing can live there. No, we know that we have a rich ecosystem. We know that we need the Namib Desert because it's bringing in a lot of money for our country by tourism. It is a place where we see as our place to camp, to relax. Do we keep it safe? Or what about the ocean? The ocean is stretching over millions of kilometers and it's deep, so we can fill it up with a lot of waste. Now, the sad thing is that the oceans are the factories of oxygen with all the plants and ecosystems happening there. The ocean is the breeding ground for food. We eat fish. We eat, excuse me, a lot of products that's coming from the ocean. And the ocean cannot be the graveyard for all the toxic chemicals. So, yeah, Chernobyl, Ukraine, Pripyat, a little town, had a nuclear explosion, 26 April 1986. We learned that nuclear power is very, very safe. No carbon dioxide that will change the world into a greenhouse, into global warming. But unfortunately, when a reactor exploded on that day, the end looks like this. Now, still, it is a ghost town. Still, nothing grows there. Still, people are being born with birth defects and deformed children, cancer, skin cancer. That was the biggest nuclear disaster that ever happened on the earth. I remember as I was 16 in 1986 that they found traces of that nuclear waste in butter in Italy. They found seabirds in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, with traces of that nuclear waste. So that nuclear waste did not only spread in that Ukraine state. No, it was with winds, it was drifting all over the globe. And if you look in your book on page 582, radioactive fallout contains elements like plutonium, cobalt, and strontium. Plutonium, cobalt, strontium. And what is the effect? Birth defects, damage to the nervous system. It can be used as a terrorist threat. Radiation sickness cause premature aging and death. If the dose is fatal, death usually occurs within 2 months. The symptoms of radiation sickness: nausea, weakness, hair loss, skin burns, and diminished organ functions. Cancer and leukemia are considered to the primary health effects of radiation exposure. And here I found a little poster, neurobehavioral decrements, anxiety, fatigue, and you cannot perform. Your nervous system needs to regulate your all actions. It cannot happen. Damage to the quiescent neural stem cells in the hippocampus. That is where you remember and learn. Circulatory system, nausea and vomiting, and then of course gonads, your ovaries and your testes. They will have a lot of mutations in them, and all your children and offspring will have deformities. Change in the bone and muscle system, skin burns, eye cataracts. There's a lot of huge problems. Then we look at non-biodegradable plastics. All those plastic bags, the ocean, the sidewalks, the road from Otjiwarongo to Windhoek. What a sad sight. But it does not look well, but is that the biggest thing? Yes, unfortunately not the biggest thing. Because plastics are making havoc in the marine life. We all know pictures where the marine animals think it is their food, they eat it, they cannot digest it, and they die. It becomes a trap. Now, like this poor seal is trapped in a fishing net, in fishing lines. They cannot get loose, they get weak, and they die. And the ocean's end full of plastics is not nice, and it sure does not smell so nice. Now, and then they are floating all over the ocean, and this floating eventually clog the waterways, spoil the landscapes, block drains, and it end up all over our place. Here we see a photo of, this was around this tortoise when it was a very young one, and as it grew, it deformed the poor tortoise. Now, by non-biodegradable plastics, the effect on the environment. Litter, once used, plastic bags go into landfills or rubbish tips. They eventually find their ways into waterways, park benches, and streets. And when they are burned, they release toxic fumes into the air that cause respiratory illnesses. Animals, 100,000 animals, dolphins, turtles, whales, penguins, are killed every year due to plastic bags, and we can include fishing nets. Animals ingest plastic bags and die. After the death and decomposition of the animal, the plastic stays intact and stays around for the next victim to fall to it. Petroleum is required to produce all these plastic bags, and it is a non-renewable resource. So, we are now using petroleum, and it is getting more expensive every day. We know that we tried, we are buying our plastic bags, and I wonder if we will see any change regarding the waste of non-biodegradable plastic bags. I would love you to look on page 583 and just make sure that you know enough examples of how dangerous non-biodegradable plastic bags are for our environment. Now, grade 12, this brings us to the end of this chapter. It is a fairly easy chapter because this is important things that you can just know by yourself. But take care, when you are under pressure in an exam situation, you will not just have it. So please read carefully and make yourself question heading of the syllabus with a few bullet points that you know. What does it mean? Why do we call it non-biodegradable? Know the meaning of the terms. Terms that I really want you to know is eutrophication. Please make a list. Eutrophication, bioaccumulation, biomagnification. What is the meaning of sewage? The meaning of radiation. The meaning of non-biodegradable. And see that you can see how that will influence the environment. Always try to get back to an ecosystem with its food chains. And our last chapter, which we will start very soon, will help us then to see how can we contribute to save our planet. Now you have your exam questions to finish, and make sure that you repeat enough to answer your exam questions. Thank you very much. The human population are increasing a lot at a very, very fast rate. And it is increasingly needing more food production. Now, to take you aback, food production means agriculture. And the moment when we write the word agriculture, we are referring to the cultivation of plants and animals. Because when we go back to our ecology, we know that the plants will be the producers of food and the animals will feed on the plants. We had a food chain. And for humans to be part of this food chain, they will need plants and animals. Do you still remember that we actually said it is better to feed a population on plants? Our reason was that from each trophic level to the next, only 10% of energy will be transferred. And if humans are the third part of the food chain, 10% of energy will move to that one, and only 10% of energy move or will be transferred to the human link in the food chain. But in order to provide food, we had to cultivate the land. And with land cultivation, it brings a problem that we had to remove plants, especially trees. We called it deforestation, to clear land, so that there are space to make this lands, to plant the food, and also to have the animals to live on and to feed them and to have them growing. And deforestation is changing our soil. It's causing floods that takes away soil, animals, and rests. It also have an influence on photosynthesis. We will have less absorption of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide levels will increase. Photosynthesis will be less. And that means less carbon dioxide to make food. But this means more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we know, leads to global warming, which is dangerous for our planet. But we also know that if photosynthesis are less, then we also will have less oxygen in our atmosphere, né? And that means less respiration. And the last one, of course, if there are not plants, there are lower rates of transpiration. And that will transpiration, and that will influence the water cycle, né? Less rain. So deforestation was really a problem to us. And we also looked at, the last one was where we looked at eutrophication due to the damage that can be done by fertilizers. Fertilizers much needed to have high produce of vegetables and fruits. And unfortunately, it will have a eutrophication where the water bodies will die. So we rather look at alternatives for fertilizers. Now, we also will need pesticides. Because pesticides lower the quality of food, but it also lowers the yield of a harvest. And therefore, we need to use pesticides. Now, pesticides are persistent, which means it stays in the environment, and they are non-biodegradable, which means that nothing can break it down into smaller components. One example is DDT, which is now expelled from many countries. They used the DDT in order to spray against mosquito larvae to prevent malaria. And this poison ends up in the soil, and it was taken up by the harvest, the vegetables, the mealies, the wheat. And now it has dangerously high levels in the body of the organisms in that ecosystem. Now, sadly, if that poison is soluble in oil and fat, it will be stored and it will accumulate. So we say that poison accumulates in an organism, bioaccumulation, when it is being stored in a live body. Now we can think that if we have a little fish in a pond, and that little fish is accumulating poison in its body. Now, the next fish, that is the next part of the food chain, will eat a few of those little fish, and you can see that that accumulation is much more in his body. And the next part, which maybe is a duck on the pond, eats many of this fish. And again, there we see if she ate 3 of the blue fish, she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times the amount of poison in her body. And this is how it is moving down a food chain. And each successive link of food chain has a more concentration of the poison, and we call it bioaccumulation, a biomagnification. Bioaccumulation, soluble in oils and fatty tissue, and it is stored in one organism. Biomagnification, as the food chain is being transferred, that poison is increasing. Each successive link of food chain concentration increase. Biomagnification. High concentrations can cause harm to organisms, including humans, and many of nowadays nervous diseases is linked to the poison that are found in the food that we eat. Some of the pesticides are wide spectrum, so you spray it and you hope that you can kill many pests at once. It means they are non-specific, and sadly, they will also kill the pollinators. If the pollinators are being killed of your orange orchard or of your mealie land, unfortunately, you will have no yield, because the pollination, we know, is what will cause the fruit to grow and to ripen later. After a while, the pests become resistant, and we will have to change the level of the poison and make it even more poisonous, killing more of other parts of the ecosystem. So, we need to use fewer pesticides and more specific pesticides. That is what we can do to decrease the amount of pesticides and do not use it so regularly so that the pests do not become resistant. Fewer pesticides and make it more specific so that it only kills specific pests. But we can also use biological control. And that brings us to our next topic. But before that, let's quickly look at bioaccumulation. Increase in the concentrations of pollutants in an organism. In that organism, it increases bioaccumulating, building up. But if that building up influence the successive food chain. Eventually, we have biomagnification, increase in the concentration of a pollutant in a food chain. Please close your eyes and see if you can repeat it. Bioaccumulation. Good. And biomagnification. And do you see the picture? This is important terminology that you need to use when